Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, as the shock from Spain's floods recedes, anger takes its place.
We don't deserve any of it. The people don't deserve this.
I'm here to demand answers because this is not normal.
With more than 200 dead, how will authorities deal with the political storm? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. An estimated 130,000 protesters took to the streets of Valencia this weekend, calling for the resignation of regional leader Carlos Mazon of Spain's People's Party.
The mismanagement of the irresponsible, the shameful ones, has to end. It's shameful that the People's Party is once again tarnishing the name of our land.
It's the latest in days of protests that have followed the storm on October 29th that devastated the region. And anger has even been directed at Spain's king and queen. When the royals visited affected areas earlier this month, protesters pelted them with mud and called them murderers. It's all a story that's hit close to home for one of our own.
My name is Bartolomé. I'm an audio producer at The Take, and I am coming to you from Barcelona, Spain.
Barcelona is about 350 kilometers away from Valencia, up Spain's eastern coast, and was also affected by the flood. And Marcos says the disaster and the way it's been handled has affected Spaniards everywhere.
No one is spared, right? Like, it could happen in Barcelona next time. Today, even it's happening in Malaga. It is definitely in 90% of my conversations.
Marcos, it's really good to have you on this side of the microphone. It is no surprise that this is what everyone has been talking about in Spain over the past few weeks. It's been described by witnesses as being like a tsunami, sweeping away animals, destroying villages, cars, buildings, and the region is now caked with mud. Take me back to when these floods hit. How did it all unfold?
So it all happened on October 29th, and I think this image of a tsunami is very accurate, only it was not a tsunami that came from sea to land, but rather from land to sea, right? And I think tsunami is accurate because at one point, the river that overflowed was carrying more water than the Nile River, which is one of the mightiest rivers on earth, right? And this is not even a river by usual standards. It's a dry riverbed because of the way things work in the Mediterranean. Rainfall is very irregular, right? So most of the people don't go about their lives thinking, oh, I live by a river. So when the flooding happens, it's so sudden, it's so surprising. And well, the extent of it was just shocking because actually on October 29th, the record for the heaviest rainfall in 1 hour ever recorded in Spain was broken, was completely pulverized, right? But the region that flooded was downstream. And downstream, it wasn't really raining or not that much. So it was raining upstream. That made it all the more sudden for the people who live downstream, right? And the images and the videos are just something that I didn't think that I would ever see. The way cars looked like rain, like leaves almost, because they were all crammed, they were on top of each other, looking like Lego pieces almost. And you had water up to the second floor. So everything down to under that was basically no longer usable. And also the alert from the government came in so late.
Let's talk about that because you're in your home and you see the water is rising. What about the alert from your local authorities or your federal authorities? How did those come in? How were people warned?
The weather agency did issue a red alert saying, this is as dangerous as it can be. And institutions who are paying attention to the weather agency did react. So for instance, the University of Valencia canceled classes, but the regional government of Valencia just didn't do anything. So life it was business as usual in Valencia. People going to work, people doing their business. And then the alert only came in at 8:12 p.m. at a time. People, like, I saw a guy on Twitter saying, the alert came while I was on top of a tree.
Oh my
Like on the
gosh.
very top of a tree. So that's how bad it was in terms of prevention. There was no prevention whatsoever.
To say that that alert was late is an understatement. Well, as we mentioned at the top of this episode, an estimated 130,000 people were out this weekend to protest the lack of that response and the slow response. And what they were calling for was the resignation of the leader of the region, Carlos Mazon, who they blame for the way that these floods were handled. Who is Mazon, and what are you hearing about why people are still so angry?
So Carlos Mazon is the president of the Valencian region, the Valencian state, if you will. He's only been in power for a short time, but he's no stranger to politics. And his party in Valencia has a very dark record of corruption. For instance, the cartel scandal, which is one of the biggest and worst corruption scandals in Spain, right? So when this party came back to power in Valencia recently, after 8 years, people were like, oh, we're getting the corrupt guys again. And they were saying, hopefully they will just be corrupt. The best thing that this party can do is just be corrupt and steal from us instead of also mismanaging things. But I guess the mismanagement of these for people of Valencia is proving that they are doing both things this time around, right? Because 130,000 demonstrators, and that's by conservative estimates, in a city that has 800,000 inhabitants, is a very big number. And people were going to the palace of the region where the government happens, and they were with their hands putting mud on the walls, so the building would also be covered in mud as a protest.
Wow.
And that's something they cleaned very fast. Unlike the villages that are still covered in mud, the palace got a fresh look right after the demonstration, right? So I think people want him out because he was missing in action for the better part of Tuesday, the day where the catastrophic flash floods were happening. He said later on that he was having lunch with a journalist about something completely unlinked to the handling of the floods. And he was out for lunch until, I believe, 6 p.m. You know, we have lunch late in Spain, but that's late even for us.
Mazon has been speaking out since then.
There will surely come a time, I think sooner rather than later, when all the administrations will review our performance, for sure. And I think we have to accept that mistakes may have been made. There is no doubt about it.
That said, the anger is not just in Valencia. You are just a little north of there in Barcelona, which has also been affected by the floods. How closely do you think this disaster hits home for people outside of Valencia, for people in Barcelona and other parts of the country, in terms of how it's rattled them?
Well, I think during that week, I was feeling very anxious for sure, because this rainfall was not a one-day occurrence, but rather it was something that kept looming over the Iberian Peninsula for days. Parts of the outskirts of the city got flooded, including the airport. I had a friend whose house got water, so I had to go help her. But in general, we were okay here. But what does this make me feel like? Is a feeling of deep sadness. I feel that politics matter a lot, and I feel that this preparation for climate change is not really happening at the level it should be happening. This is hitting so fast. It's hitting sooner than expected. It's hitting to a more violent extent. And we are just not prepared, right? We truly aren't.
What are your conversations like with people? Does this just come up? I know that just this past weekend, you were doing something that people in Spain do at this time of year, and that's gather mushrooms. The talk of politics and this faulty response and the floods? Is that part of your normal conversation, just when you're out and about with people?
It's all we're talking about. I mean, we're also talking about Trump being elected, right? Because that's like a global thing that happens to everyone. But it is definitely in 90% of my conversations. I was very surprised, like positively surprised with the response of average Spaniards. I was, as you know, I was gathering mushrooms in a small village that has some 100 inhabitants. And I saw that in the main square of the village, there was, like a stand that the neighbors had installed, so you could donate like your water, your rain boots, your coats, all sorts of food that you could purchase in the supermarket and then go. And they would go like every day. They were going from that village to Valencia to just like lift the stuff. So I think people are behaving very generously, and because honestly, no one is spared, right? Like it could happen in Barcelona next time. Today, even is happening in Malaga. There is several thousand people who had to be evacuated, and there's a hospital that got flooded. And I think Spain in particular is very, very prone to seeing this happen again, just because of the construction boom that the country has been experiencing at different intensities since the 60s, right? So let me tell you something that is, I think that is what sticks with me the most out of everything. I saw this picture of the flooded area in 1956, the flooded area in Valencia, right? And superimposed, it had another picture of the floodable areas. And the non-floodable areas coincided exactly with the human settlements. So all the floodable areas was just crops because people had a lot of knowledge of the land. The same picture of the same land in 2024 says a very different message. You see how everything is buildings. It's a huge urban sprawl where you have houses, where you have factories, where you have shopping malls. So I think the authorities, the governments are not building wisely. They are trying to be, mightier than nature somehow.
More with Marcos after the break. So Marcos, we've been talking about the lack of preparedness, and I'm wondering, given that lack of preparedness, what you think or how prepared you think Spanish authorities are for what could happen next?
I think not prepared at all. I think it has a lot to do with how profit is put on top of prevention, because a part of the economic structure of Spain has to do with building again. We are one of the countries where more people has second residences. We're one of the countries that sees like most tourists coming, right? And these tourists obviously stay in buildings, and these buildings are unfortunately built in floodable areas in many cases. Actually, 3 in every 10 buildings that were in the flooded area in Valencia were built after the year 2000. So if it's a building built in the 60s, you can make the claim that during the Francoist dictatorship, people were not aware of like climate change. But you cannot make that claim after in the 21st century. That just doesn't hold.
You know, we've done a lot of conversations with people following natural disasters all around the world. And one thing that sticks out to me is that they are usually adamant about staying. They don't want to leave their homes and the places they know. Keeping that in mind, I want to talk about the forecast, because the area between Valencia and Barcelona is on alert again for heavy rainfall as we speak today. Thousands have been evacuated, as you mentioned earlier, in the southern city of Malaga. Do you expect that we're going to be seeing more and more disasters like we saw in Valencia? And if so, what will people do?
I think we 100% will see more things like this moving forward. The catastrophe that just happened in Valencia, which is first and foremost, I'll say a political catastrophe and not a natural catastrophe, because no one can like the rain is not obviously something that humans send, but the way we respond to it is. So it's a political catastrophe. And Spain is not having politically the reckoning that should happen at the moment. We are not planning at a national scale how we're going to respond to the fact that so many millions, I think it's almost 3 million people, live in floodable areas in a country of less than 50 million inhabitants. But it's also so difficult. How you tell someone, could you please leave? Could you please not live here? Because it's the authorities in the first place who said, this area is fit for building. It completely breaks the trust one wishes to place on their politicians, you know?
Well, finally, Marcos, what would that reckoning look like? Because you're right, it is really difficult. So as an observer, it's easy for people to say the government did this wrong and this is the government's fault. But what should happen next time?
So many things. So, for instance, we should have well-funded emergency systems. For instance, the government of Carlos Mazon defunded the agency that was in charge of coordinating emergencies in the Valencian region 1 year ago. Something else that should happen is that politicians should take very seriously the weather agency. People should be trained. They should know what they're expected to do in case they receive this message. Areas that are floodable should have more trees that will function as a way to stop the flows of water or to make them go more slowly. And some people are learning the lesson. For instance, the mayor of Seville, after the flooding in Valencia, said, oh, we're not going to build the I don't know how many thousand houses that we were planning to develop in this floodable area, which I thank him for. This is what politics is here for, right? Like helping people not to get their houses flooded.
And that's The Take. If you're short on time, but still want to catch the highlights of our conversations, check out our YouTube shorts. We post quick clips with the best moments from our episodes that you don't want to miss. It's a great way to stay connected. Have a look, and I'll see you tomorrow.